Chapter 26 of the Paradise Mystery. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Kristen Hughes. The Paradise Mystery by J.S. Fletcher. Chapter 26. The Other Man. It was close on 5 o'clock when Glassdale, leaving Folliot at his garden door, turned the corner into the quietness of the precincts. He walked about there for a while, staring at the queer old houses with eyes which saw neither fantastic gables nor twisted chimneys. Glassdale was thinking, and the result of his reflections was that he suddenly exchanged his idle sauntering for brisker steps and walked sharply round to the police station, where he asked to see Mitchington. Mitchington and the detective were just about to walk down to the railway station to meet Ransford, in accordance with his telegram. At the sight of Glassdale, they went back into the inspector's office. Glassdale closed the door and favoured them with a knowing smile. "Something else for you, Inspector," he said. "Mixed up a bit with last night's affair, too. About these mysteries, Braden and Collishaw. I can tell you one man who's in them." "Who, then?" demanded Mitchington. Glassdale went a step nearer to the two officials and lowered his voice. "The man who's known here as Stephen Folliot," he answered. "That's a fact." "Nonsense!" exclaimed Mitchington. Then he laughed incredulously. "I can't believe it," he continued. "Mr. Folliot, there must be some mistake." "No mistake," replied Glassdale. "Besides, Folliot's only an assumed name. That man is really one Falkiner Wraye, the man Braden, or Brake, was seeking for many a year. The man who cheated Brake and got him into trouble. I tell you it's a fact. He's admitted it, or as good as done so to me just now." "To you? And let you come away and spread it?" exclaimed Mitchington. "That's incredible. More astonishing than the other." Glassdale laughed. "Ah, but I let him think I could be squared, do you see?" he said. "Hush money, you know. He's under the impression that I'm to go back to him this evening to settle matters. I knew so much, identified him as a matter of fact, that he'd no option. I tell you he's been at both these affairs certain. But there's another man." "Who's he?" demanded Mitchington. "Can't say, for I don't know, though I've an idea he'll be a fellow that Brake was also wanting to find," replied Glassdale. "But anyhow, I know what I'm talking about when I tell you of Folliot. You'd better do something before he suspects me." Mitchington glanced at the clock. "Come with us down to the station," he said. "Dr. Ransford's coming in on this express from town. He's got news for us. We'd better hear that first." "Folliot! Good Lord, who'd have believed or even dreamed it?" "You'll see," said Glassdale as they went out. "Maybe Dr. Ransford's got the same information." Ransford was out of the train as soon as it ran in, and hurried to where Mitchington and his companions were standing, and behind him, to Mitchington's surprise, came old Simpson Harker, who had evidently travelled with him. With a silent gesture, Mitchington beckoned the whole party into an empty waiting-room and closed its door on them. "Now then, Inspector," said Ransford without preface or ceremony, "you've got to act quickly. You got my wire. A few words will explain it. I went up to town this morning, in answer to a message from the bank where Braden lodged his money when he returned to England. To tell you the truth, the managers there and myself have, since Braden's death, been carrying to a conclusion an investigation which I began on Braden's behalf, though he never knew of it, years ago. At the bank I met Mr. Harker here, who had called to find something out for himself. Now, I'll sum things up in a nutshell. For years Braden, or Brake, had been wanting to find two men who cheated him. The name of one is Wraye, of the other Flood. I've been trying to trace them, too. At last we've got them. They're in this town, and without doubt the deaths of both Braden and Collishaw are at their door. You know both well enough. Wraye is—" "Mr. Folliot," interrupted Mitchington, pointing to Glassdale. "So he's just told us. He's identified him as Wraye. But the other, who's he, doctor?" Ransford glanced at Glassdale as if he wished to question him, but instead he answered Mitchington's question. "The other man," he said, "the man Flood, is also a well-known man to you. Fladgate." Mitchington stared, evidently more astonished than by the first news. "What!" he exclaimed. "The verger? You don't say!" "Do you remember," continued Ransford, "that Folliot got Fladgate his appointment as verger not so very long after he himself came here? He did, anyway, and Fladgate is Flood. We've traced everything through Flood. Wraye has been a difficult man to trace, because of his residence abroad for a long time and his change of name, and so on. It was only recently that my agents struck on a line through Flood. But there's the fact, and the probability is that when Braden came here he recognized and was recognized by these two, and that one or the other of them is responsible for his death, and for Collishaw's too. Circumstantial evidence, all of it, no doubt, but irresistible. Now, what do you propose to do?" Mitchington considered matters for a moment. "Fladgate first, certainly," he said. "He lives close by here. We'll go round to his cottage. If he sees he's in a tight place he may let things out. Let's go there at once." He led the whole party out of the station and down the High Street until they came to a narrow lane of little houses which ran towards the Close. At its entrance a policeman was walking his beat. Mitchington stopped to exchange a few words with him. "This man Fladgate," he said, rejoining the others, "lives alone, 5th cottage down here. He'll be about having his tea. We shall take him by surprise." Presently the group stood around a door at which Mitchington knocked gently, and it was on their grave and watchful faces that a tall, clean-shaven, very solemn-looking man gazed in astonishment as he opened the door, and started back. He went white to the lips and his hand fell trembling from the latch as Mitchington strode in and the rest crowded behind. "Now then, Fladgate," said Mitchington, going straight to the point and watching his man narrowly, while the detective approached him closely on the other side. "I want you and a word with you at once. Your real name is Flood. What have you to say to that? And it's no use beating about the bush. What have you to say about this Braden affair, and your share with Folliot in it, whose real name is Wraye? It's all come out about the two of you. If you've anything to say, you'd better say it." The verger, whose black gown lay thrown across the back of a chair, looked from one face to another with frightened eyes. It was very evident that the suddenness of the descent had completely unnerved him. Ransford's practised eyes saw that he was on the verge of a collapse. "Give him time, Mitchington," he said. "Pull yourself together," he added, turning to the man. "Don't be frightened. Answer these questions." "For God's sake, gentlemen!" gasped the verger. What is it? What am I to answer? Before God, I'm as innocent as any of you about Mr. Brake's death. Upon my soul and honour I am." "You know all about it," insisted Mitchington. "Come now, isn't it true that you're Flood, and that Folliot's Wraye, the two men whose trick on him got Brake convicted years ago? Answer that." Flood looked from one side to the other. He was leaning against his tea-table, set in the middle of his tidy living-room. From the hearth his kettle sent out a pleasant singing that sounded strangely in contrast with the grim situation. "Yes, that's true," he said at last. "But in that affair I wasn't the principal. I was only Wraye's agent, as it were. I wasn't responsible. And when Mr. Brake came here, when I met him that morning—" He paused, still looking from one to another of his audience as if entreating their belief. "As sure as I'm a living man, gentlemen," he suddenly burst out, "I'd no willing hand in Mr. Brake's death. I'll tell you the exact truth. I'll take my oath of it whenever you like. I'd have been thankful to tell many a time, but for Wraye. He wouldn't let me at first, and afterwards it got complicated. It was this way. That morning, when Mr. Brake was found dead, I had occasion to go up into that gallery under the clerestory. I suddenly came on him